Welcome to the 2020 On-Farm Network Results Series. I'm Megan Burns, agronomist for the On-Farm Network program. This short video contains some important information on what to expect from the results series and tips to interpret some of the trial information. So usually we would present our yearly On-Farm Network trial results at our On-Farm Network Participant Appreciation Dinner. However, those plans had to change this year thanks to the pandemic. So we thought we would create short digestible videos that go over the highlights of results from each trial type that we had in 2020. So these videos are meant to be a really quick overview of the highlights. You'll notice that they are quite short in length, and you can find a video for each of the 16 different trial types that we had this year in the On-Farm Network. So you can kind of pick and choose which ones you might be interested in and which ones might apply most to your farm operation. A couple of things are new this year in the On-Farm Network. So we had a couple of new trial types, including some more faba bean research. And then we also had new in-depth data collection, including things like measuring canopy closure in our row spacing trials. And something exciting, or something that we're really excited about at least, is we now have some basic economics incorporated into all of our results as well. So the On-Farm Network, which is MPSG's in-house research program, is designed to help farmers test different agronomic management strategies, different products and practices on their farms. It truly is a by farmers, for farmers type of program. It's participatory, it's precise, and it's proactive. The program has continued to grow in size and popularity since MPSG first began conducting on-farm trials back in 2012. This year, the On-Farm Network hosted a total of 56 trials in 4 different crops. So we had trials in soybeans, peas, dry beans, and faba beans as well. And we investigated 16 different agronomic questions. Now, before I set you loose to dive into the results for each trial type, hang on a quick second here to get the lowdown on some statistics and economics interpretation tips. So very briefly, to make sure that we're all on the same page, let's review interpreting statistics in On-Farm Network results. So we have 2 example graphs here from our pea fungicide trials in 2020. The first thing I want to address is that although we may have anywhere from 8 to 12 total strips per trial, total plots per trial, when it comes to results, we present the comparison between the overall average yield of the 2 treatments. So this is the average yield of all the untreated strips from this trial and the average yield of all the strips with a single application of fungicide from this trial. We replicate in a trial to determine whether or not the effect of the treatment is real, so to speak, or if any difference that we see in the numerical value of yields between our treatments at the end of the season is just due to random variability. So we need those replicates to determine whether or not there's a significant result. But the point of replicates, or the point of replication, is to be able to present this overall picture of what actually happened when we applied that particular treatment. So that's why we just present the overall average yield of the 2 treatments rather than each individual replication. Okay, so we have 2 example graphs here from our pea fungicide trials. The one on the left, you'll notice, has 2 A's above the bars. So this indicates that statistically, the yield of the untreated and the yield of the single application peas was the same. So effectively, those 2 yields from a statistic standpoint are not different from one another. This means that the treatment, so in this case, a single application of fungicide, did not influence yield. It didn't have an effect on yield at the end of the season. So not significantly different from one another, our treatment did not influence yield. On the other hand, on the right, we have a B and an A above the bar, so 2 different letters. This indicates that the yields of the 2 treatments are significantly different from one another, and the treatment, a double application of fungicide in this case, did influence yield. So that yield difference that we see, the difference in height between the bars there, that was a result of the fungicide application. That's what the statistical significance tells us. So it did cause that yield difference in this case. We also include some statistics information in the tables that we present with each of the figures to help with interpretation. It should make it easier to interpret. So what tells us whether or not there's a significant difference between our treatments is this thing called a p-value. Now that's just a value that is part of the output of our statistical analysis that we run through our computer program. And basically anything that has a p-value less than 0.05 is significantly different. So the treatment was having a significant effect on yield or whatever it is that we're measuring. Now, in order to make it super easy, in addition to having the letters above the bars to indicate whether there's significance, we also have a line in the bottom of all of our tables that state whether or not there's a significant yield difference. So that's what the p-value means, but you don't need to worry about looking at whether or not it's less than 0.05. You can just look at the significance statement and the letters above the bars. Now, the last statistics piece of the puzzle that I want to inform you about is this thing called a CV. So CV stands for the coefficient of variation. Basically, this is a measurement of how variable the yields of each strip or plot within a trial are from one another. So a higher CV means that there's more variability across the trial area. For our purposes, anything over about 10% would be considered quite variable. Now, a CV of 10% overall in field research is still really good. We're still getting really good results. But with the way that we design our trials, our CVs are typically, between 4 and kind of 7 or 8. What a higher CV means, so what more variability means, is that it becomes harder to determine if your treatment is having a significant effect on yield, because there's just so much random variability or spatial variability in your data, just from strip to strip across the trial. So it becomes more difficult to determine significance. So that's what that C value means, or CV value means. We want to see it lower, and generally speaking, based on how we set up our experiments and how they're designed, we are able to maintain C values less than 10%, which is great in most cases. Okay, so that was a very brief overview of the statistics. Now, the last thing I have to go through here with you is how to interpret our economics tables, especially because this is something that's new this year. So the way that we incorporated economics this year, it's intended to be just a very sort of simple assessment of economic outcomes using values that would apply to most operations. So obviously your specific costs and your market prices that you get are going to differ, right? But we have selected values that we feel are average and sort of stable over time as much as they can be. Most of these values come from the Manitoba Cost of Production Guidelines, but they were also developed from just various discussions we had in trying to kind of suss out which values would be most applicable in most cases. So in the results tables, you'll see a column that indicates the cost. So this is the change in cost with that product application or that management practice. That's how much we roughly estimate it to cost per acre. And then there's also a change in profit per acre column. Now, the change in profit per acre column indicates how your profit is changing as a result of that management strategy or that product application, whatever it might be. So there are obviously two situations. One where we have no significant yield difference, as we see in the graph and table here. And secondly, where we do have significant yield difference. So starting where there's no significant yield difference, effectively from a stats standpoint, like we just talked about, this means that the two yields are not significantly different from one another. The treatment, in this case, the fungicide application, was not having an effect on yield. So although you see this 1.9 bushel per acre yield difference between the two yields for the two different treatments, that's just due to random variability. So our fungicide application didn't cause that increase, right? That's what the lack of statistical significance tells us. Because of that, because the fungicide didn't cause a change in yield, there isn't a difference in income to account for, and therefore our change in profit per acre just presents that product cost as a straight loss. So we didn't get any return on investment, so to speak, at the end of the season from that product application at fungicide timing. So that's why the product cost is presented as just a straight loss in profit per acre, where we don't have a significant yield difference. Now, on the other hand, when there is a significant response, so the treatment is having a significant effect on yield, the change in profit per acre takes into account the change in cost per acre with using that product or management strategy. It takes into account the change in yield as a result of that product use. So now this yield difference here, this 4.5 bushels an acre, that is being caused by our treatment. So we're going to take that into account in our economics. And then obviously it also accounts for what the cost of the management strategy or product was. So it takes all of that into account, and we see how the profit changes per acre across a range of market price. So again, your specific costs and the market price that you get may differ, but these economic tables are meant to act as sort of a gauge and a guide for interpretation of the results. Obviously, all economics should be considered on a farm-by-farm basis and a year-by-year basis when you're making decisions for your operation, but this at least gives us a starting point for a general sort of economic overview of the results. Okay, so that should be all the intro and background information that you need to enjoy the results videos. As always, if you have any questions about specific results or interpretation, if there's anything you would like to discuss and how it may apply to your farm operation, or if you would like to get involved or have a trial idea, please feel free to reach out to me via phone or email at any time. A big thank you to all of our On-Farm Network participants from this year. We look forward to more successful seasons in the future.